Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are you going today? Today we're going to continue on with our simplifying algebraic fractions. So it's part 2 out of 4 of simplifying algebraic fractions. Last lesson we focused on multiplying and dividing fractions. Today we're going to look at adding and subtracting fractions. So our title for today, simplifying algebraic fractions, part 2, adding and subtracting. So throw back to year 7 and year 8. So recall when we had to add fractions or subtract fractions. Say you wanted to add 1/3 with 2/5, what you would do in year 7 and year 8 is saying, well, look, my denominators aren't the same, so we need to make sure our denominators are the same, then we can add or subtract fractions. So then what you would do in your year 7 or year 8 self, you would go, well, let's multiply the first fraction by 5, top and bottom. And then let's multiply the fraction on the right, top and bottom, by 3, because the lowest common denominator between 3 and 5 is 15. So that gives us 5 over 15 plus 6 over 15. And then you go, oh, look, because we have the same denominator, we can just add the numbers on top together. So you get 11 over 15, and then you can add fractions. It's the same thing with subtraction. As long as you have the common denominator, you can add or subtract fractions. So that's the same thing with algebraic fractions. So it's just rather than just pure numbers, we have variables involved as well. So as long as you have a common denominator, you can always add and subtract fractions. So some dot points. So must have same denominator, it's got underlined, same denominator to add and subtract fractions. I mean, ideally you should go for the lowest common denominator. It just makes life easier, so you don't have to do as much simplifying afterwards. But it's not the end of the world if you don't find the lowest common denominator, as long as it's a common denominator of some sort, and it's fine. So ideally, find the lowest common denominator The other thing you should take note of is, just like how in year 7 and 8, your answers always has to be simplified fractions. Your answers for algebraic fractions also need to be simplified as well. So what that means in terms of algebra is that you must always factorize and then simplify your final answer. So always check for that. Always factorize and simplify your final answer before it is your final answer. So let's do some easy examples today, and then next lesson we'll do a bit more trickier examples. That's next lesson. So example 1. The verb is to simplify. So part A, we want to simplify x on 4, take away 2x on 5. So right now we can't really do anything to two fractions because the bottom denominator is not the same. So we need to make sure the denominators are the same for both fractions before we can subtract them. So on the first fraction, we're trying to find the lowest common denominator between 4 and 5. Well, that's 20. So if I times 5 and then times 5, top and bottom. So make sure you show you're working what you're multiplying by, top and bottom. Because what you got to do to the top, you got to do to the bottom just to make it fair. So that gives us 5x over 20 minus 2 times 4 is 8x over 20. So that gives us 5x minus 8x all over 20 because we have the same denominator. And then 5 xylophones take away 8 xylophones gives us a negative 3x over 20. And that's it for our answer for part A. Let's do another one. Example B. We want to go 7x on 3 plus x on 6. So again, we're adding fractions, so we need a common denominator for it to work. Now, the lowest, if you look at the denominator, it's between 3 and 6. So the lowest common denominator is 6. So what we need to do is multiply by 2 for the first fraction, top and bottom, and then multiply the second fraction by 1, top and bottom. So then that gets us 7 times 2 is 14x over 6 plus 1x over 6, but it's ninja 1, so 14x plus 1x or over 6 because the common denominator is 6, so that gives us 15x over 6. And then you check, well, is my answer simplified? Now, a lot of people in the exam would just go, oh yeah, I'm done, 15 over 6, that's my final answer. Now, but remember, the key point was you can only add and subtract fractions if you have a same denominator, and you must always simplify and factorize your final answer, or quotation final answer, because it's not final. So can you simplify this answer 15x over 6? Are there any common factors between top and bottom? Well, both 15 and 6 are divisible by 3. So if I divide top by 3 and divide bottom by 3, technically I get 5x over 2. So your final answer is 5x over 2, not 15 over 6. So a lot of people tend to make the mistake on the exam and just say, yep, I just make the same denominator, I just add them, and I get 15x over 6, but they always forget to check their answer for this most simplified form of